Hi everybody, welcome to another video. This isn't going to be an easy one. Most of you probably know that I was pregnant at the end of last year with our third son, Ori. I actually prefer to call him Orion. And probably most of you know that he was stillborn at 25 weeks. He died on the 5th of December 2018. And he was born on the 8th of December 2018, which would have been exactly 26 weeks. I'm sharing my story not because I want attention or because I want sympathy. As I have always done with my channel, I just wanted to share my stories and my life with other people because I have found a lot of comfort and solace in knowing that I'm not on my own, and I know for a fact that there are lots of people going through exactly the same trauma as me. Having my own experience of stillbirth has really opened my eyes to how incredibly common it is. I joined a Facebook group shortly after he was born for neonatal death and stillborn support. Other mothers, parents, carers, bereaved, just like me, and I have been astounded in the almost 6 months since he was born at how many people join every week and say that they are planning their baby's funerals. I don't necessarily think that stillbirth is a taboo topic. There's nothing wrong or shameful or dirty about it. I just think that it simply makes people uncomfortable. It goes against the natural order of things, and naturally we would shy away from something that makes us feel so fragile. If a baby could die, anyone can die, right? Losing a pregnancy, a baby, an infant, a child, at any gestation or age or any point of life is tremendously painful, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. We need solidarity and community to be uplifted and loved through our deepest, darkest moments. I have received an enormous amount of support through my experience. We both have, John and I. And I can't help but think that perhaps I'm the lucky one. I think of all those people out there who are going through the same thing without the same level of support as we have been offered. So I'm sharing my story in case somebody out there is looking for comfort and finds it in the knowledge that they're not alone. I'm going to tell you what happened in the lead up to his death and his birth afterwards. I was really unwell that week. I had a horrible cold. I had lost my voice. I was trying to take it easy where I could, but with 2 other children, a house, a husband, and everything else in between, it was difficult to find that time. I woke in the early hours of Wednesday morning, Wednesday the 5th of December, with Fox next to me, who was also unwell. And we were kind of just tossing and turning together because neither of us could sleep properly. I was aware of Orion moving a lot at this point. It was quite uncomfortable. I remember thinking that it was very low and I could feel him basically kicking my cervix. I was also aware that I was losing fluid, and enough to make me put a towel between my legs. The reason that I didn't get up and call the hospital right away is because this had happened before, at 20 weeks, and I'd had lots of little amounts of fluid lost between 20 weeks and 25 weeks. I had been examined more than I really needed to be. I was told time and time again that nothing could be found that was wrong or posing any kind of threat to either one of us, and that we were fine, and that our waters looked fine, his waters looked fine. Because it had happened before, I assured myself that it was probably just another episode of fluid loss and that it wasn't anything to worry about. But I decided, since it was so early in the morning, to try and get some sleep and then see how I felt when I got up. It had stopped by the time I got up and I went about my day. I don't remember much of Wednesday, but I remember Thursday. I had become quite anxious by that point that I hadn't felt him moving around. I tried to take my mind off it. John took Fox out for the day and it was just me on my own. I busied myself doing some crafty things that I wouldn't ordinarily get the chance to do because I don't ordinarily have that much alone time. But by that evening I had made up my mind that I was going to go to the hospital and get checked out because I couldn't ignore how I felt. So off I went. I arrived at the hospital at 9 p.m. and was eventually seen at about 10 o'clock. The midwife tried to reassure me that it was probably fine, it was just that he was being quiet. She listened in with a Doppler and tried to find his heartbeat. I wasn't surprised when she couldn't find it. This had happened before, during one of my midwife appointments. Because I had a placenta that was anterior, it meant that sometimes picking up his heartbeat was difficult. But at this point in gestation, it should have been fairly easy. She went away and she brought back a registrar, I believe. The registrar took a quick history and explained that she'd like to give me an ultrasound, and I knew that things were serious. In the ultrasound room, I basically knew, and I think, if I'm honest, I already knew before I went into hospital. I just went to have my worst fears confirmed. She was too quiet for too long. She said that she had to go and get someone. The midwife volunteered to go and get someone. At this point, I started crying because I knew what she was going to tell me. She said that she didn't want to scare me, but that she had to check with her consultant. The consultant arrived, took a look at the ultrasound, and after a very brief and hushed discussion with her registrar, she had to tell me that unfortunately my baby had died. The midwife gave me tissues. I was offered condolences. And I was taken around to a room that was different to a hospital room. It was still a hospital room, but it was more comfortable. It had refreshments, soft lighting, a few more home comforts, I suppose you might say. I knew that this was the room that they take women to who had lost their babies. I was examined and I had bloods taken. My cervix was still closed and the consultant felt that it couldn't have been my waters that had broken, even though on the ultrasound she had told me that she couldn't see any amniotic fluid around Orion. I was also asked at the point of the ultrasound if I wanted to look at him, and I said no. It was too painful. I hadn't actually looked at the screen the entire time. I was left in the care of one student midwife and one senior midwife, both of whom were exceptionally lovely. I called John and I told him what had happened. He was stoic. And he reassured me that everything would be fine, that he would take care of Leo and Fox while I was gone, and that he would be waiting for me when I got home. Some time passed. I was told that there was a procedure that would take place now. I'd be offered 2 medications. One that would stop my pregnancy hormones, and the second that would bring on labour. I was offered to take the first medication there, but I declined and said that I'd rather go home and come back in the morning, which is what I did. I also had to text my midwife and say that I wouldn't be able to make my appointment the following day because there was no baby. Well, there was, it's just he had stopped living. I went home. I had also called my mum, who happened to be away, 120 miles away at that point. And I know if I'd asked her to, she would have got in the car straight away and driven home that night, but we both agreed it was more sensible if she came home the following day. One of the midwives who was looking after me walked me to my car and made sure I got in it and that I was on my way home. Getting into bed next to John and next to Fox was all I really wanted to do. And waking up the next morning was like being buried by an avalanche. The sudden sort of realisation of what had happened, and it all came flooding back to me and I was buried. I had to go back in that morning to take the first medication. It was the same room, a different midwife, but I took the medication and I came home. That day had to be very practical. We had to set things up because we knew that we'd be having to go to the hospital and taking most of the weekend up just delivering Orion. And we had to get shopping and we had to make sure that the boys had all their things because they were going to stay with my mum. We took the boys to my mum's, they had dinner there, they settled down for the night there, and we didn't actually leave until about 11 o'clock. I started to have some back pain late in the evening, which I took paracetamol for. I assumed that it was just some muscular pain. I had been coughing so much with this ridiculous cold that I figured it was just DOMS, some muscle pain. The paracetamol took the pain away, and I had to tidy the house before I went to sleep. I couldn't go to sleep with the house being messy. And we all do funny things when we have trauma like this. Cleaning and tidying I find very comforting, and clearing. I was woken the next morning by a contraction. I know them very well by now, having had 2 labours and this being my 3rd. So I knew what it was. We had a casual morning. It felt odd because we don't normally get mornings like that without the boys that are so casual and so self-centred. We packed up, we got ready to go to hospital, and I received a text from my community midwife, Kat, who told me that she would be in the hospital and that she had asked to take care of me during my labour, which is one of the kindest, most loving gestures I think I've ever received from someone who was basically a stranger to me. I have a lot of gratitude to her for being there with me, with us. We arrived at the hospital and there was a lot of waiting around after we had been checked in. When we went to the reception desk, I didn't have to say why I was there, I just said who I was, and the receptionist said, "Come with me." And she took us, John and I, round to the room where I had been previously. I saw several people there. I saw an anaesthetist, I saw the surgeon, I saw, my community midwife, Kat. It was explained to me that they would be giving me the medication and that it was an internal medication, so it would be put inside me to bring on labour and that it could take quite a while. They were a little worried because this is basically an induction of labour and I had 2 caesarean scars. My caesarean scar is relatively fresh, having had Fox only less than 2 years before that. Eventually, at about 1:45, and we'd been there since about 10, 10:30, the time came to have the medication. The reason they had taken so long is because they were deciding how much to give me. In the end, they gave me a half dose, and my midwife Kat gave me that. And she told me that it could be a while. But within 20 minutes, I had begun to feel contractions. Satisfied with that progress, Kat left to go and have her lunch break. I was also having lunch. We were just sort of waiting, really, eating, mooching around on the internet. And these contractions started to come quite quickly and quite strong. I remember that they escalated very quickly, and I felt pretty out of control very rapidly. I asked John to take my iPad away, to put the food away, because I felt like I was just going to knock it off the bed. And then suddenly it was just like a ton of bricks. Labour hit me, and I just was absolutely floored. I started to shake uncontrollably. I needed to go to the loo. I needed to have a wee, and John helped me, and it was like Bambi walking on ice for the first time. I just couldn't get my feet. I was so wobbly. I needed help getting to the toilet and back to the bed. I got back to the bed and I said that I wanted gas and air. We called the midwife. It was a different midwife to Kat because Kat was still on her half-hour lunch break, and she gave me gas and air, and we asked why I could be shaking. She said that it was probably adrenaline. Gas and air really forced me to breathe deeply and to slow down. That stopped the shaking, but the contractions were unbelievably strong. When Kat came back, she could hardly believe her eyes as to what was happening. I was in the throes of labour, and I was not coping particularly well. But I explained that I didn't want to do this for, several more hours, and I asked for some stronger pain relief. They put me on a morphine drip, which I controlled. I had a little button that I had to press every time I wanted morphine, but it was locked out, so I could only have like a milliliter every 5 or 10 minutes or so. The anaesthetist came and double checked that everything was okay. She wasn't terribly happy with my oxygen saturation, so I was given nasal prongs and oxygen. I improved, and the morphine didn't really do a lot for the pain, but what it did do is it chilled me out in between contractions so that I could rest and gather myself for the next one. I remember then that I needed to go to the toilet again. I had been drinking water so much because I was breathing so rapidly. I was getting a dry mouth, and John was just staying by me and offering me water and comforting me as much as he could. I'm sure it was very difficult for him to see me in so much discomfort. I went to the toilet and I had a contraction while I was in the bathroom, and I leaned over on the toilet to brace myself, and I remember thinking how much better that felt, how I could cope with the contraction so much better stood up. Active birth, I got back to the bed and I was aware that I felt wet. I conveyed this, and Kat asked whether I had wiped properly when I went to the toilet. I said that I was pretty sure that I had. So she checked and she confirmed that basically what was left of my waters was now leaving me. At some point around now, I decided that I wanted to push. I didn't have an overwhelming urge to push. It wasn't like my body was doing it against my will. I just had this feeling that perhaps pushing would make it feel better and easier somehow. Maybe. Okay. Not long after I began actually actively pushing, part of my placenta came out. This was an old part of my placenta. It was quite large, about the size of my hand, and it was brown, so it wasn't fresh, but it was probably one of the things, or the very thing, that actually caused me to have a lot of bleeding. I learned very recently from my friend who was my doula when Fox was born that sometimes the placenta has like extra little lobes of placenta that are attached by blood vessels and things, and it looks like perhaps this one had detached itself at some point, which may have been the cause of all that bleeding. Naively, I asked if that was the baby because it did feel like something quite large came out of me, but the hardest part was yet to come. It wasn't long after that I felt something else, and my midwife was able to tell me that the baby was coming. He was coming breech though, so he was bum first, and he was quickly, his bum was born, and then his legs came out as well, and then obviously like his shoulders and stuff. I remember the feeling of his head being born, being very full and quite like an intense sort of stingy feeling. I had the presence of mind at that moment to actually pant and push very lightly so as not to cause myself any damage. And then he was born. There was another midwife in the room at this point. I don't know where she came from or when she arrived. She asked me if it was okay to give me the oxytocin injection in my leg, which she did, and that hurt a lot, and I yelled about it. They asked me if I wanted him on my chest, and I said yes. But his umbilical cord was actually too short to put him on my chest straight away, so they said that they would have to cut his cord, and I had, in that split second, I said, "Can John do it?" And John agreed that he would be fine doing it if he was allowed, and they said yes. So John cut the cord, and they put Orion on my chest, and it took me a while to look at him. They did warn me that obviously because he wasn't alive, he wouldn't look like a normal baby. But they put him on my chest, and eventually I had the courage to look at him. I was checked over for any damage. I didn't need any stitches, I didn't have any grazing or anything, so I had come out the other side intact basically. But Orion obviously wasn't a full-size baby, so I would have been surprised, I suppose, if I'd had any tearing of any kind. The really serendipitous part of this is that my midwife Kat was going off shift at 3:30 in the afternoon, and Orion was born at 3:26 in the afternoon. So the whole thing, from the first contraction that I felt after having the medication to him being born, took 2 hours and 3/4, which is a really short time for a labour. It went so much faster than anybody expected. We were told to settle in at the beginning, that we could be here for a long time. My midwife was actually able to tell me that when I delivered Orion, the rest of the tablet came out, and they'd only given me half a dose, so I apparently didn't need that much encouragement to just go into full-on labour and actually get on with it. One of the things that I was worried about prior to going into labour was actually whether I would dilate at all. Both of my labours with Leo and Fox, I never dilated at all. I had lots of contractions, but without the pressure of their heads pushing down on my cervix, because neither of them were ever able to get into my pelvic inlet, and they never engaged. It meant that I never dilated. I was really worried that this would happen again with Orion, and that I would need another emergency C-section. I was assured by the doctor that it was very rare that happened, and she would be able to bet good money on me dilating and birthing normally. And it did, and everything went so smoothly considering the circumstances, and I am just so incredibly grateful for that, because I know that there are some women who go through obviously the trauma of delivering their stillborn baby, but also just the physical trauma of birth sometimes, that I feel incredibly lucky. I was up and about within, I don't know, an hour or so. I took a while to rest and I tried sleeping, but I think I was just a little too agitated from and processing everything that had happened. Eventually, I took a shower. It was during this time that we swapped over our care to a bereavement midwife, or I don't know if she was a bereavement midwife, but she seemed to be handling that part of our experience. Once Orion was born, she took him and she cleaned him and she took some photos and dressed him and brought him back to us in the cold cot, and we were able to have him in the room with us, and we were able to hold him and take our own photos and just be with him. It took a long time for us to leave the hospital. There was lots of waiting around for various sign-offs and paperwork and doctors. We took a nap together on the hospital bed. The side effect of me being small is that I don't take up much room. Eventually we left at about 11 p.m. Leaving the hospital and leaving him behind is one of the hardest things that I have ever done. Like, even just signing the paperwork to say that we wanted him cremated and that we were happy for the hospital to arrange it through their funeral directors, that wasn't as hard as leaving him at the hospital. That was incredibly difficult. But oh my god, he was so perfect in so many other ways. His hands and his feet were beautiful, and every part of him was just as it should have been. He was tiny. He was probably only about as long as my hand to my forearm, everything from head to his toes. It took a further 3 weeks for him to have a funeral. The funeral home that was dealing with him only had 2 slots per day for babies, one at 9:30 in the morning and one at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and every day was full with the exception of Christmas Day and Christmas Eve and maybe Boxing Day, but every day was full for the next 3 weeks. And that was probably the first time that my eyes had been opened to the prevalence of baby death and baby loss. Orion was old enough that he was able to have a birth certificate and a death certificate. He is officially in the system, and yet there are so many babies who are born before 24 weeks who don't get that because they aren't considered viable and they aren't considered a full being, I suppose. That was the other thing that was really strange, was having to go and register his birth and know that that was after we had registered his death. I have since donated money to SANS, which is a charity for neonatal death and stillborn children. They've been useful. I'm also going to counselling with a charity that's not run by the NHS. It's local. I don't know if this is normal, but the counselling that I've been receiving has been really helpful in processing everything that happened. After I was at home and, after I delivered him, I was in contact with the bereavement midwife team. They would call every day, and then every other day, and then maybe twice a week, and then maybe once a week, until eventually I said that it was okay and I would call them if I needed them. Having that support has been invaluable as well. And also, I made it very clear to my friends and my loved ones that I didn't want them to stay away from us because they thought that we needed our privacy. I actually wanted to be surrounded by people. I definitely didn't want to be on my own. I needed people to be with me, and I wanted to be surrounded by them. It has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life, and I'm forever changed. I will never be the same. I will always remember him, and he will always be a part of me and my history. I got his footprints tattooed on my arm as a monument to him. They are galaxy in design, and they are his actual footprints, one for one. So I will always be able to look down at them and remember that that was the size of his feet. And he had beautiful feet, just like his brother and his dad. Brothers and his dad. If you've had an experience of baby loss, pregnancy loss, or if you just want to leave a comment, please do. I read all of them. And I will be back with another video at some point. Thank you for watching. I know it's been a long one. Take care, everybody.